Well, as previously stated, this is a follow-up. I want to talk about Conclave. I want to talk about not the film, but the actual Conclave, and some of the speculation as to which cardinal will become the next pope, the 267th pope he will be. Um, I will say this, often I've just been looking at old newspapers from 2005, the death and state funeral of Pope John Paul II, and 2013 when Benedict XVI resigned. And in both those conclaves, there was names put forward, and then in both cases, we had pontiffs who were not even named. So back in '05, at least the papers I was looking at, Joseph Ratzinger wasn't even a name. In 2013, likewise, Jorge Bergoglio. I wouldn't at all be surprised if the man who appears on the balcony in St. Peter's Square is a complete surprise. It wouldn't, it wouldn't at all surprise me. Um, we're now in a period which is known in Latin as sede vacante. It's one thing I like about the Vatican. I like that a lot of things are in Latin. I mean, the whole thing about Latin Mass is one of those dogmatic debates that goes on in Catholic circles. But I must admit, I like the sound of Latin. I think it's got a certain elegance to it, a certain, it carries the history of the church. The position of Pope is, of course, like I said in the last video, a hugely significant position. I mean, spiritual head of 1.2 billion people, the world's largest religion, it's no small thing. So the direction of the church is something that actually has huge implications well beyond Catholics, because um, Catholic majority countries account for a significant part of the world, and so the direction is very critical. And it isn't just that, it's also, even in countries which don't have a Catholic majority, we see a rise of the Catholic population, such as the United Kingdom. That's been the case since Benedict XVI came here in 2010. So even in countries that don't have a Catholic majority, there's a sizable Catholic minority, and so there is influence there. There's also the ecumenical viewpoint. That is to say, how the future pontiff will relate to the Archbishop of Canterbury. That election, incidentally, is taking forever. I mean, um, I'm not quite sure why it takes so long, but that's that. I'm going to go through some of the names being cited and just read out a little piece in the Times, but I'll prefix this by giving my own thoughts on this. I'm not a Catholic, so you might wonder, why do I care? I care for the reasons I've said, because of the power and the influence of the role. I hope, I really hope the conclave picks someone who is a reformer, who is in the mold of Francis. Um, I'm not saying they need to be far left. I'm not saying they need to be so revolutionary that they really polarize conservatives to the point where there could even be a papal schism. I'm not saying that. I do think that what Francis recognized and what his pontificate showed is the church had to get into the modern world, had to really recognize that, for example, some of the stuffy dogma that goes on just doesn't, even most Catholics don't really see it as relevant. And I maintain that the Gospels don't say anything about divorced people not being able to receive communion. I mean, if the personification of the Bishop of Rome cannot be Christ-like, if they cannot follow Christ's teachings to that point, then what's the point of it? I do think one of the problems of the Holy See, and I find it fascinating and fascinated by the history and the customs, but I do think one of its flaws is it can get too wrapped up in dogma and forget the basics. That's what I liked about Francis. He was down to earth. He remembered the basics. Now, there's a lot of interesting things that can be said about this conclave. All three popes in my lifetime have been non-Italians. So Pope John Paul II from Poland, Benedict XVI, Germany, and Francis from Argentina. There's a bit of speculation of an Italian comeback, because for the preceding, I think it was 500 years, or up to 500 years, they were all Italians. It's just a given that the Pope's an Italian. And indeed, of 266 popes to date since St. Peter, 217, I believe, have been Italians. So there's been a very heavy Italian dominance. After that, the next most represented nationality is French popes, apparently. Now, there's been some speculation of the first Asian pope, that technically isn't true because in antiquity, in the early church there were actually popes from Syria and Asia Minor, which is now Turkey. Technically, that's part of the Asian continent, so that's just to set the record straight on that. So it's more accurate to say there could be the first pope from the Far East. Um, and if I was choosing, he would certainly be one of my favorite candidates. I'm just going to go through this and then add a bit more to it. But yeah, it's I think there's a reason why so many non-Catholics are interested in this. The whole ceremony, the whole, locking oneself in, literally locking themselves in, the white smoke, the black smoke. I mean, it makes for, look at the amount of times this has been featured in popular culture. Conclave was a critically acclaimed film, Angels and Demons, The Two Popes, to cite three examples. I mean, I think there's genuine public interest, and I admit I find it fascinating, much more so than the Church of England. The Church of England, there's history there, it's interesting, but not quite to the extent of the papacy. And I'm saying that as someone who was baptized as an Anglican. Anyway, this is some of the names being mentioned. I will read them out and then say what I think. Not up to me, of course. I mean, that's the ironic thing. It's not particularly democratic. We have 120, let's face it, old men choosing the destiny of 1.2 billion people, so we can't exactly say the Vatican's democratic in that sense. On the other hand, it is, because there has to be a unanimous decision and they vote in ballots, just like any other election in that sense. So, in that sense, it is democratic. So, all voices are heard, Conservative cardinals have their view, liberal cardinals have their view, so in that sense, it is democratic. Peter Erdo, 72, a Hungarian Archbishop of Esztergom, Budapest, and the Primate of Hungary. Erdo caught the eye of conservative Catholics when he objected to Francis's plan to allow divorce and remarry Catholics to receive communion. He has also distanced himself from Francis's outreach to migrants by claiming that taking in refugees is on par with human trafficking. That's Peter Erdo. He would certainly be a controversial pick, and you know a lot of people who have hailed Francis's reforms would genuinely fear Peter Erdo in the seat of Saint Peter. That would be definitely a lurch to the conservative side of things. Wim Ike, 71, of the Netherlands, the Dutch cardinal. There's only been a couple before, I think only one in fact, was a doctor before entering the priesthood and completed a PhD on the ethical problems of genetic engineering. Like Erdo, he has won accolade from conservative Catholics for challenging Francis's decision on divorcees. In 2018, when Francis did not block a proposal by German bishops to allow Protestants to receive the Eucharist in Catholic churches, I claimed the Pope was drifting towards apostasy from the truth. I mean, that's the sort of thinking that belongs in another century, really. So I hope he doesn't get it. I'm going to interrupt here because I should have said this earlier. We once had an English Pope, Nicholas Breakspear of Herefordshire, or Hertfordshire, it was, but he was Pope from 1154 to 1159 at a particularly difficult time for the Church, and he was facing pressure from Free France, the Holy Roman Empire, the Crown in England, and elsewhere. He's largely forgotten, but some people think he should be better remembered. He's the only English Pope to date. We have had anti-popes, and one of them, I've done a bit of research on this, actually was a rector in my church, Sunderland Minster. He was Robert of Geneva. He was a bit of a corrupt tyrant. He sold off the very lucrative salary that he got from Sunderland Minster and St Michael's and All Angels. It wasn't the Minster then. But he basically used the salary to campaign for the papacy, and he became anti-Pope Clement VII. But by all accounts, he was a bit of a tyrant. That's a little bit of history. There's four English cardinals, most prominently Cardinal Peter Nichols, I believe is his name. Um, he said that conclave's intimidating. I don't think we're going to see an English Pope. I think it's highly unlikely. Even though this is not a Catholic country, we do have four cardinals, but I don't think we're going to see an English Pope. I think that would be wishful thinking. So Mario Gretsch, 68, hailing from the tiny island of Gozo off the main island of Malta, Gretsch is risen through the Catholic hierarchy, become Secretary General of the Synod of Bishops after firmly backing Francis's leeway in divorcees taking communion. In an interview in 2018, he summed up Francis' way of thinking by saying, I am wary of those priests or Christians who feel they already know all the answers. That's a nod to you, Mike, I think. No one can make that claim. We all have to continue searching. He had a conservative outlook before embracing Francis, which some traditionalists believe he will revert to if elected. I think he may have a problem with people may think he's a bit opportunistic or inconsistent. Pietro Parolin, I personally think this guy is the most likely of those who have been named. As the Vatican Secretary of State under his 70, under Francis, this Italian cardinal has been an effective has been his effective deputy following 30 years of diplomatic service around the world. He assisted in the freeing of 15 British sailors and Marines captured by Iran in the Gulf in 2007. I remember that incident, and helped the United States to establish diplomatic ties with Cuba in 2014. Conservatives begrudge him his role in the Vatican's deal with Beijing to jointly appoint bishops in China. um, I think he's most likely to be pontiff of those who've been named. Luis Antonio Tagle, 67. There's been a lot of talk about this guy. Nicknamed Asian Francis, Tagle sided with him on the question of communion for divorcees and has pushed for better treatment of gay people within the church. He has also suggested that allowing married priests would help solve the shortage of clerics in his native Philippines, something guaranteed to irritate conservative Catholics. Former Archbishop of Manila, who won plaudits in Rome with Francis's Mass in the city in 2015, which drew a massive crowd of 6 million people. His star waned, however, in 2022 when Francis sidelined him as president of the Catholic charity Caritas following reports of mismanagement. There may be questions there. And then the Times finally speculates Matteo Zuppi, 69, seen as close to Francis, Zuppi was nevertheless able to keep in the conservative scriptbooks by allowing the Latin Mass to be celebrated in his Bologna diocese, declining to get involved in arguments about divorcees receiving communion and women in the priesthood. I mean, this thing about divorcees receiving communion, that should not be a priority for the Catholic Church. It really shouldn't. Head of the Italian Bishops' Conference and France's special envoy to Ukraine, Suppi is something of a celebrity in Italy after appearing on TV shows and riding a bicycle around Bologna when he was Archbishop there. He is closely linked to Egidio, a lay Catholic association that helps migrants. I personally think my instinct, and this is absolutely rough speculation, it's going to be one of those last three. It's going to be Parolin, Tagle, or Zuppi. There's also been a Spaniard that's been named, uh, an American's been named. One interesting person is Peter Turkson of Ghana. Now, often African clergy are seen as ultra conservative for things like gay rights. Turkson's an interesting name because he's not that conservative. He's um, hardly a liberal, but he's actually said, and this is quite remarkable coming from an African cleric, he's actually said that African countries' laws on homosexuality are, I quote, too harsh. Although he understands that both sides need to be understood. I think if Peter Turkson became Pope, he would potentially be the first black Pope. I say potentially because we cannot be 100% sure that there hasn't previously been a black Pope in antiquity. There is a possibility of that. But nevertheless, in the modern era, that would be a big thing. I personally think Peter Turkson could be an interesting candidate. He has been named in every conclave, but so far it hasn't happened. Um, but this is the six people who the Times speculates on. So yeah, we have Parolin, Gretsch, Tagle, Erdo, Ike, and where's Zupi? Zupi. Personally, I mean, it's not up to me, obviously, but personally, I hope it's Tagle, or someone that can really make a big mark. But, you know, if it's someone like Pietro Parolin, I think that would be all right. It would be kind of back to basics in a sense. He's an Italian. I think he sounds capable. But you know, he's been clever. He's avoided the politics of the church, which is not an easy thing to do. But it may be just because we don't know his politics, he may turn out to be very conservative. He may turn out to be a reformer. I think someone like Pietro Parolin will be sort of a transitionary pope, not a particularly, you know, heavyweight pontiff. Maybe just a transitionary figure. Maybe there will be some that think Francis was too reformist and they want to get back to basics a little bit. Or what I mean by that is play it safe. In other words, Pietro Paroline's a kind of boring choice. He's a safe pair of hands. Tagle might be seen as too radical, but so would someone, on the other hand, like Peter Erdo, that would really alarm liberals and reformists in the church, and indeed many around the world. Just looking at opinions on this, I know a lot of Catholics actually want to go back to conservative things. They saw Francis as being too reformist. What I would respectfully say to them is Francis inspired many, many people outside the Catholic Church. But surely, if you want to be relevant in the 21st century, that's a good thing. Surely you would welcome that. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think it's fascinating. I'm looking forward to it. Honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing who is going to appear in that balcony. Will he be a surprise, or will he be one of these people? I wouldn't at all be surprised if it isn't any of these six names, because that's happened before. Like I say, in 2013, Jorge Bergoglio, no one had heard of him. And the other interesting thing is, of course, is the papal name. There have been 23 Pope Johns, a lot of Pope Innocents, a lot of Pope Clements, Pauls. Um, Pope Francis II could be a possibility. Pope John Paul III, Benedict XVII. Who knows? That the speculation around it is fascinating. I think. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Again, if you're a Catholic, what are your thoughts? Who do you want to see elected? Um, it's without question whoever gets into that position is going to have enormous responsibility. Francis did address the sexual abuse scandal to a large extent, but it's far from gone. I think that's something that's going to haunt the church for a very long time. And one thing that must come out of it, that must be clear, is what those priests done. It's criminal. It's not good enough to say, as Justin Welby said in the Church of England, I forgive. There has to be a recognition this is a crime. And whoever becomes Pope has to unequivocally say, priests who engage in that, bishops who engage in that, are criminals. They're committing a crime, and we respect the laws of their respective countries. It's not good enough to just move them on to another parish. There was a scene in the film The Two Popes. Now, again, it is just a film. It may be, there's artistic license there, but there was sort of an argument between Benedict and Francis over the church's handling of this. And Francis said, look, what we've done is just moved them on to another parish. That's not good enough. If there is knowledge of this, the church has to work with the police and hold these offenders to account. It's not good enough to just move them on to another parish. Francis, to his credit, I think, did take the issue seriously. Benedict, I think, did make some attempts, but he didn't go far enough. Francis went a bit further, but that's something that isn't going to go away. Issues, like I say, not allowing divorcees to take communion. Honestly, any cleric who thinks that's a priority isn't paying attention to the problems in this world. And I don't think it's particularly Christ-like either.